Let's begin. Let's just settle in for a moment. So we want to begin with our bodhicitta motivation. Bodhicitta being the wish to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. So it comes from compassion. It's born of compassion, but it's a lot more than mere compassion. Because of the wisdom aspect that understands, the cause of suffering is fundamental ignorance, and the way to uh, overcome fundamental ignorance is to attain enlightenment. So we see the suffering of others, we feel compassion for them, and then we're adding the wisdom aspect about the cause of suffering, and then determining to attain enlightenment for their benefit. If that seems like too much, we can just think, may the time we spend together this morning benefit not only ourselves, but others as well. Okay, so is that going to be constant noise? Let's wait and see. I'd rather leave the door open, but if it seems like it's like a regular thing, we can close it. So put in the chat if you have a question, or what questions do you have, if any?
I'm just learning and taking.
You're just learning? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Nobody?
Question.
Yes.
At the point that I'm at, knowing that I'm sort of up and down in my regularity, but I'm back in the swing of things.
Mm-hmm.
Is it unusual to still be getting distracted?
No. No, not at all. It's very, very challenging to practice without any distraction. We have such a strong habit of distraction, and not just from this life, but from countless previous lives. So that's why, it requires training to be aware, to be focused, right? Which is like why we practice. So, yeah, no, it's not unusual at all. Okay, so I would like to talk about the Four Noble Truths today, which I know that you are familiar with, but I'm guessing that you are not familiar with. So, and we can always review the Four Noble Truths, man. I never get tired of it, honestly, because it's the first teaching of the Buddha. It's not complicated necessarily, but one can forget quite easily what they are. And so it's good to review even if we know them. Sharon, can I trouble you to please, can you bring me that box of tissues there? Thank you. Thanks. Pardon me. Okay, so the Four Noble Truths was the first teaching of the Buddha. I'm actually going to move my chair because I want to face you. That's better. So Four Noble Truths. So after the Buddha attained enlightenment, the first teaching that he gave was the Four Noble Truths. And in brief, they are the truth of suffering, truth of the cause of suffering, the truth of the cessation of suffering, and the truth of the path which leads to the cessation of suffering. Sorry, excuse me. So the word suffering here is really important to understand the um, connotations of that and sort of the proper understanding of that. So Sharon, can you explain that? Do you remember
The
the word dukkha? Like, what does that really mean?
that it's a range of the kind of suffering that we have as humans that ranges from just annoyance and irritation
Mm-hmm.
to really, physical agony or mental agony.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So the word dukkha, the word dukkha has been translated as suffering. Okay, but it's a little problematic because for us in the English language, suffering is a big deal. If we say I'm suffering, we mean like it's heavy, you know. But dukkha includes, as Sharon stated, even really small things like just being uncomfortable, being a little thirsty. That's dukkha, right? Also, being flayed alive is dukkha. So it's kind of like, the whole range. So it's kind of like, you know, so when we use the word suffering in the Buddhist context, we kind of have to retranslate it to include that entire spectrum. Okay. And there just doesn't seem to be a word in English that encompasses the whole thing. Because a lot of times dukkha is translated as like dissatisfaction or unsatisfactoriness. But, you know, if you ask, if like if someone's being flayed alive, right? They're not going to say this is most unsatisfactory, right? It doesn't work for that. But suffering doesn't work for just needing to adjust the pillow in my back, like that's too heavy. So we just have to remember when we use the word suffering, that's what it means. Okay. So the truth of suffering is just the Buddha wanted people to see that there is suffering and the range of suffering. Now, we might think, of course, I know there's suffering. I'm not an idiot. Of course, there's suffering. But it's this range that I just described to you. But more importantly, it refers to the kind of subtle ways that we suffer without ever realizing it. Okay. So there's that sort of gross level of understanding of, you know, what we just described. And then the more subtle level of understanding is like, you know, everything that we do, almost everything that we do is related to suffering. So if have a sip of water, it's removing the suffering of thirst. And we don't think about that, right? And we're constantly adjusting our life because of these constant discomforts, like stretching out our leg, right? Or, it's, wonderful snowy day on the weekend and there's a roaring fire in the fireplace and we go outside to make a snowman with our kids or whatever. And then we get cold and so we go inside because we're cold and then we stand by the fire and then the fire becomes too hot and so we have to back up off the fire. This kind of thing we don't even notice, like even in sleep, like we're moving all the time when we sleep, right? Why? Because we're suffering. At some point it becomes uncomfortable. Okay. So this is happening all the time. Then there's the deeper suffering of really um, being like never being satisfied, never finding contentment. So this we really almost never notice. We have this like craving, this drive to find lasting happiness. Okay. And we are always making the mistake of thinking that lasting happiness is outside of ourselves. So we look for it outside, you know. If only I could get a better house, a better mate, a better, you know, if only I could lose weight, if only I could be younger, if only I could get a better job, right? And then we might get those things. And then we hardly notice like our level of satisfaction, the amount of time that we feel a sense of happiness or satisfaction is so small, you know. Like let's say that we want our dream house and we're sort of looking around for our dream house and we finally find it and we have saved up all this money in order to be able to buy this house, and then we buy the house and we move in and it's like one night maybe where, where we feel happy, we feel, oh, we're finally here, and then it's like, oh, I gotta unpack all these boxes, and then unpack all the boxes, and finally you finish unpacking and you're like, oh, we finally finished unpacking, it's so great, and we got everything decorated just the way we want, and then again, it's very short lived, and then we just, oh, the roof is leaking. Oh, the plumbing needs to be fixed. Oh, my neighbors are so loud. I didn't know that when I came and looked at the house, all kinds of things. And again, it's not that, we shouldn't look for a house, so we shouldn't try to better our life. Of course we should. We should. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The problem is when we expect lasting happiness from those things. We can get temporary happiness from those things, but not lasting happiness. And in constantly trying to manipulate the outside world to bring happiness, all we do is suffer. All we do is find dissatisfaction, unhappiness, and like we don't notice it because as soon as that thing ends, we've just picked up another thing that we're going to run after, and then we get that, and then we're like happy for a second, and then we just look for something else. I really like the example of the uh, Apple, right? The phones and the computers, right? Because they have that down, like right away they got that. Oh, you got a new phone? Guess what? There's a new one coming out in a month. Now your phone is obsolete. It's a dinosaur, you know, right? You get a new computer, you just take it out of the box, and it's like, oh, I don't have enough RAM, I don't have enough whatever, and oh, there's this new computer with a better CPU or whatever, you know? So when the Buddha said there is suffering, please see that. That's the kind of thing he's talking about. The suffering that we don't see. Okay. And he laid out three kinds of suffering. The suffering of suffering, which I know sounds a little ridiculous, but it is essentially the kind of suffering that we think of in the English language when we use the word suffering. We get sick, we lose loved ones, this kind of thing. Okay? That's the suffering of suffering, easy to understand. Then there's the suffering of change, okay? And that's the suffering that arises because of impermanence, because we expect unconsciously, subconsciously, unknowingly, whatever, we expect things to be permanent, right? So the teachings say like anything that we find pleasant and enjoyable eventually goes away. Okay, so fall is such a good time to talk about that, right? It's so pretty these days. It's sunny and the leaves are so pretty and lovely, and in a couple weeks they will all have fallen down and be gray, and we have to figure out what to do with them in our yard. And winter is coming, right? Cleveland winter is coming, maybe, unless global warming stops everything from happening. Who knows? Yes.
Oh, as an example of suffering, I just got rid of my husband's dory. They've been rotting in my driveway.
His what?
A boat.
Oh.
In my driveway.
Wow.
And, I helped somebody break it up, and he put it into the dumpster.
Wow.
And so, for me, that's suffering because I have good memories.
Sure.
But yet, it's also not, because it's finally accomplished. It's been needing to be done for 13, 15 years. It's finally done. So for me, suffering and change, it's all mixed into like one great, like it's all together. It's a change, something finally accomplished. It shows impermanence, because I could watch the boat decaying every day out my kitchen window.
Yeah.
And it's accomplished. So I feel happy it's done. But I'm also sad because it's an ending.
Right.
It's been a long time coming.
Right.
Yeah.
So it is important when we discuss impermanence to realize that impermanence can be painful and impermanence can also be joyful. Like impermanence means when you have COVID, eventually you don't have COVID. Eventually you heal from that. Or if you don't have a car, you could get a car. This kind of thing. Impermanence also works in that way. And Thich Nhat Hanh, who was a great Vietnamese master, passed away a couple of years ago. He says like without impermanence, like there can't be anything. There can't be flowers and trees and sunshine and children growing up, and all these things require impermanence. But the point with the Four Noble Truths is just pointing out what the situation actually is. How are we living our life actually? What is actually happening, and how we are looking in the wrong place for lasting happiness. And I keep using this word lasting because it's very important. Yeah. We experience temporary happiness, all the time, right? Like looking at these beautiful fall leaves, you feel happy. It's so beautiful. It's so nice, but that's going to change and eventually they won't be there. So we can't rely on that. Or we think, um, a relationship is going to bring us lasting happiness. That's a big one, right? And then even if we have the best relationship we could ever hope for, even if every day is just bliss, which we all know doesn't happen, even if we have a really good relationship, it doesn't always happen. And at some point, you have to separate. That person dies, or you die, or you break up, or whatever it is, right? So that's not going to bring us lasting happiness. And the funny thing is, like, we have countless examples of these things not bringing us lasting happiness, yet we still have the expectation that they will bring us lasting happiness. And this is why the Buddha wants to shine a spotlight on that and say, look at how this is actually functioning, right? So um, anything that we find pleasurable, pleasant, eventually disappears. That's one. The second point of that, the suffering of change, is anything that we find pleasant, if we do it long enough, turns into suffering. Okay. So, I find it pleasant to drink this water, but if someone just forced me to drink water nonstop, I would die, it would eventually become something really painful. There's lots of examples like that. If you're eating ice cream and you love ice cream, but you never stop eating ice cream, you're going to throw up at some point. It's going to become suffering. Why is the Buddha pointing that out? Because, again, to show us the reality of things. Sometimes people, especially when they hear these teachings on the Four Noble Truths, they feel like, oh, I've heard this so many times, like, Buddhism's so pessimistic. All they talk about is suffering. Buddhism, bleh. But it's talk about suffering so we can get out of suffering. The first two noble truths are talking about like this is suffering. This is how things are, and the second two are like how to get out, right? So the whole thrust of this path is actually to remove suffering for ourselves and others. Okay, so that's why the Buddha is saying, please look at this because we don't notice it typically. Okay. And if we don't know what the situation is, then how are we going to escape it? How are we going to get out of it? Right? It's like being very sick, but not knowing that you're sick or not knowing what kind of illness you have. So, like I was saying, like some people think like Buddhism is neither pessimistic nor optimistic, right? It's realistic. That's the thing. It's realistic. This is the situation. This is how to get out. So pessimistic is like just, you know, oh, there's no hope, there's no point, everything is suffering, you know. Optimistic is like, you don't have to do anything. You just have to say a little prayer on your deathbed and everything will be fine. Come on, you know, right? So we need to look at these things. And these are things that we should examine for ourselves. We should look at ourselves and not just accept, right? We talked about that last week, the Kalama Sutra, the Kamala Sutra, right? And don't believe just because the Buddha said it, or just because it's in a book, or just because it's your tradition, or your parents said it, or your society, blah, blah, blah. Test it for yourself. So I really encourage you to do that, you know. Where am I looking for happiness? You know, is that working? And if we examine that, we'll see it's not work. It doesn't work. It doesn't work long term. Okay. So there's the suffering of change with those two subsets, and what's called all pervasive suffering. So all pervasive is another word that's kind of, I don't know what the original word is, but it's not exactly that. It's just kind of like the suffering that comes just by virtue of having a body. Like we're going to feel pain, we're going to get sick, we're going to age, like that kind of thing. Like just by virtue of being in cyclic existence, there's going to be suffering. It's kind of like that. Okay. So that's the truth of suffering. The second noble truth is the truth of the cause of suffering. Okay. So what is the cause? If we have an illness, we need to know, and that they give this example of like, imagine that you're sick, you have some kind of illness, and the Buddha's the doctor, and you go to the doctor, and you're like, hey, so the doctor tells you, well, this is your illness, this is the cause of your illness. Good news, there's a cure for that, and here's what you need to do to get rid of your illness. Those are the Four Noble Truths. Okay, so the cause of suffering from the Vajrayana point of view is fundamental ignorance, called Rikpa. So fundamental ignorance is different from ordinary ignorance, like ignorance of the law, or, you know, ignorance of whatever, science. You know, it's not about that. It's about ignorance about the nature of reality itself. Okay. So the way that we perceive things is not at all the way things really are. All right. And on a scientific level, we can actually see that that's true, or from a scientific point of view, right? So, like this table seems very solid. I can knock on it. It seems quite solid, right? But science says it's molecules and atoms moving around. Quantum physics says it's mostly space and light. I don't see it that way. I don't perceive it that way, you know. But I trust these people scientists, you know, who have done the experiments and so forth, and are saying that that's the way that it is. So I'm perceiving the table in a way that it does not exist truly in reality. Okay. So fundamental ignorance is kind of like that. We are not perceiving our reality, the entirety, ourselves and the outside world as they really are. That's from the Vajrayana point of view. Theravada point of view is a little different. There's various schools in Buddhism, which we can talk about later. They say the cause of suffering is craving. So their whole thrust is kind of different than in the Vajrayana. All right, so the third noble truth is there is a cessation of suffering. So that, this is the easiest and shortest one. It just means this can end. We're not obliged to suffer. We can get to a point where we don't suffer anymore. So this illness, if we want to go back to that example, is curable. Okay. And then the fourth noble truth is the path which leads to the cessation of suffering. All right. And again, that path will differ somewhat depending on the school of the Buddhist tradition that we're following. Okay, so from the Vajrayana point of view, which is our school, then it's the path is in briefest terms study or hearing. So that means learning the teachings, right? And contemplation. So that means thinking about the teachings, trying to, like I was saying before, like examine it, and see, like, is this really true? Is everything impermanent? Is that true? What have I found anything in my life that brings me lasting happiness? Like to examine it, right? To contemplate it. And the third point there is then practice or meditation, where we can make these, we can sort of digest these truths, yeah, in a more sort of, in a deeper way, that it becomes like part of us, right? So those are the Four Noble Truths as taught by the Buddha. It was the first teaching he gave after attaining enlightenment. And I just found it really, really interesting, because he attained enlightenment. Like that's tremendous. And sometimes they use the word, like in our closing prayers, they use the word omniscience as a synonym for enlightenment, for full enlightenment. And he decides to start with that. Like why? I just find it very interesting, right? And I think that's why, because we don't see it. And unless we see the problem, we can't deal with it. If we don't know that we have cancer, for example, then we can't do anything to cure it because we don't even know we have it, right? So if we can find out that we have it, then we can get treatment for it and hopefully get cured from that, right? Questions? And people on YouTube, you can put in the chat if you have a question.
Is Zen Buddhism considered a school of Buddhism?
Yes. Excuse me. Zen is within the Mahayana.
Okay.
So we have the three vehicles, right? The Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. And Zen is within the Mahayana. But
Do you know, besides the mindfulness practices of Thich Nhat Hanh, do you know what other kinds of practices they utilize in Zen? I'm just curious.
well, I mean, Zen is very, very heavily focused on sitting and like concentration. But they focus a great deal on maintaining the posture. Um, yeah, and I guess focusing. I mean, I'm not the best person to answer that question for you.
That's all I've been able to come up with.
Yeah, which is why I left Zen, because I just didn't find that it was deep enough, and I didn't find that there was enough structure there or teachings there to like guide my life. Like they do have the sort of bodhicitta ideal. That's why they're in the Mahayana school. So they have the four impossible vows or something like that. I think it's called, where it's like, though the many beings are numberless, I vow to save them. There's four in that vein. But when I was practicing in Japan and then in India, in the Zen tradition, that's all I found. And they do chants, they do like the Heart Sutra, I think. They do some things like that. And of course have temples and monks and things like that. But they're very much into, mindfulness, but really very beautiful mindfulness, And then, then now it's coming back to me a little bit. Then, so you have Soto Zen and you have Rinzai.
Oh,
And I'm not sure exactly what the differences are between those two, but one of them has the koan practice,
yes.
right? So koan is essentially like an unanswerable question. Like probably the most famous koan is, what is the sound of one hand clapping? So that's a koan. Okay, and the purpose of koan practice is to like stop your mind, kind of stop your conceptual mind by trying to answer this unanswerable question. Okay. If you're interested in Zen, I highly recommend DT Suzuki's The Three Pillars of Zen is Roshi Philip Kaplow, which is quite good. DT Suzuki's text. Do you know?
Beginner's Mind.
Beginner's Mind. Yeah. Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind.
I think it's so simple. I keep trying to read that. It's so simple. I can't understand it.
It's beautiful, but it's really beautiful. Just keep trying, because it's quite, it's very profound, actually. Yeah. So, yeah, but I would read that, and apparently you have read it already, and I would read Three Pillars of Zen. And then for, my experience of Zen was almost exclusively in Japan, and it's just really practiced differently, I think, in America. So maybe look into Charlotte Joko Beck. Do you know her?
I've heard that.
Yeah, I didn't even know if she's still alive anymore, but she was quite a well-known Zen teacher in America. So I think that would give maybe a better idea of what Zen is here. And Dogen, you know Dogen?
Yeah.
He's from the ancient times kind of master, maybe one of the founders of Zen. So the philosophy is quite interesting. But in practice, I just didn't find it that useful. For me.
Okay, that's what I was curious about, because I wasn't able to find anything,
Yeah.
Relative to Vajrayana practice.
No, there's no Vajrayana practice there. It's cool, though, and it's very beautiful. And, you really have to, it's this whole thing about, when the cook in a Zen monastery is not supposed to waste even, a single grain of rice. You have to pay so much attention, it's really nice, And I think that Thich Nhat Hanh, it appears to me, kind of blends some of the traditions a little bit. It's mostly Zen, but he has other practices that at least I've never seen in Zen. But also, just different practices are, there's varying focus depending on where it is. So Buddhism started in India and then traveled to, Tibet and China and all these other places. And so maybe Zen in Vietnam is practiced differently than Zen in Japan, So that could be the thing too. I don't really know. Any other questions? No? All right. Nobody on YouTube has a question? I know somebody was saying they didn't know how to put anything in the chat, but I can't tell you. I don't know. It's just here. Okay, so then let's start with some mindfulness or breathing practice. Okay. So we're all in chairs. We want our feet flat on the floor or on a cushion if we can't do that. If you're sitting on the floor, then just cross your legs in whatever way is going to work for you. It's comfortable. So the hands should be either palms down on the knees or palms up like that in your lap, or with your fingers on top of each other and your thumbs touching like that. So you guys can see it on YouTube, and maybe you can see it here too. I kind of have a wonky thumb, this thumb, and I did what's called a sesshin when I was in India at the Japanese temple. So it's like a week-long, very intensive meditation thing where they hit you with the stick if they think you're. That as soon as I got hit, I was like, I'm out. I'm out. See you. And I went home. I said, I'm not gonna. No, this is not for me. But anyway, I got yelled at for that because he thought I wasn't keeping the posture properly. And I'm like, it's just my thumb is weird. Sorry. Anyway, so you can do that. So whichever those hand positions are most comfortable for you. Then the back should be straight but relaxed. The arms are relaxed by the side. The shoulders should be back a little bit. So normally I just kind of roll my shoulders back one time and it kind of opens up here. Because the spine is straight, the back of the neck is also straight, so the chin is going to be tucked in just a little bit. Mouth is closed but relaxed, tongue resting on the roof of the mouth. Breathing through the nose. Ideally, the eyes are open and looking down a few feet in front of you, so a relaxed, lowered gaze. That's the posture. And the posture is the way that it is because it supports the mind in meditation. So, what are we doing with our mind? We are bringing our awareness to the sensation of the breath coming in and out of the nose. So, we're kind of just focusing at the end of the nose here and using that sensation as our point of concentration. Okay, so take a moment to just notice that. Okay, so that's the sensation. We want to keep a relaxed awareness of that sensation. So we're not grabbing onto the breath or chasing the breath, just a light touch, trying to maintain consistent awareness of the breath, letting the thoughts come and go as they will. So a thought will arise, dwell, and disappear on its own, be replaced by another that arises, dwells, and disappears in a continuous chain. The aim is just to let that happen without running after the thoughts. But it's most likely at some point in the meditation, we are going to get distracted and get really involved in one of the thoughts that arises. As soon as we realize that we've gotten distracted, simply bring the mind back to the breath. Okay? So I'm going to ring the gong to start and also to finish. Now you can begin to count the breaths, counting either every in-breath or every out-breath up to a total of 10 complete breaths. Counting helps us to realize more quickly if we've gotten distracted because we will have lost count. So if you, let's say you get to 4 and then just galloping off with some thought, as soon as you realize that, just, oh, okay, come back, start again at 1. If you get to 10, without losing count, don't get distracted by that. Just go back, start again at 1, and that's it, right? This is a practice of getting used to the mind in the state of awareness versus the mind in the state of distraction, and being able to recognize both of those states and to bring the mind back from distraction into awareness. So if we are getting distracted, it's not a failing. It's normal. Like I was saying at the beginning, we spent eons distracted. So of course it's going to be challenging to not be distracted. But as soon as we realize that, that's a victory, a cause for celebration. Oh, I realized I was distracted, and that's great. That's very cool. I'm just bringing the mind back. Okay, so please begin counting now. questions, ladies? Any questions? Question? Lucy?
I just wanted to say, today was a triumph. I didn't have a coughing fit in the middle of.
I'm sorry, what?
I didn't have a coughing fit in the middle of.
Oh, yes.
Which I realize is a form of distraction for me.
Okay,
So I'm happy when it doesn't happen.
Yeah, great.
It's at home too, so. not
Good.
just here.
Good, very good. All right, very good. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the practice of Tonglen, practice of exchange. I think you were here last week, right?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So we did explain it last week, but I'll explain it again because I never know who's on YouTube, I just see a number, so I don't know if that's somebody who's already enlightened and doesn't need to hear anything, or if it's a brand new person. I have no idea. So um, anyway, uh, so the practice of Tonglen is called the practice of exchange, and we are exchanging. We're taking on the suffering of others and offering them our own happiness. Okay, and it is to develop our naturally compassionate heart to its fullest degree. It really is a marvelous practice. I didn't talk about it very much last week. We just kind of did it. I went through the instructions, but this practice it's just so. Oops, sorry about that. Okay, I don't know why. It's a practice that is very, very powerful and very useful. So, um, we practice it in a formal setting like this, or on our own meditation cushion at home, just to like really get used to it, how to do it, and become more familiar with it. But it's useful for um, so many things. Of course, the main purpose is to generate compassion, to be able to train our heart mind to be compassionate. But it's just such a great thing to do when we don't know how to help somebody. You know, with those situations come up often in life where somebody's dying, for example, and like there's only so much you can do, or somebody's addicted, or somebody's in the middle of a divorce or something like that, painful long term kind of thing where we can feel kind of helpless, like I want to help this person, but I don't know what to do for them. We can always do Tonglen for them. And people have told me over and over again over the years how that practice has really helped them and helped them to help others, and that they could see the change, in helping someone else. Like years ago, I had somebody who was a hospice volunteer, you and hospice, when someone's passing away, they can get to a point where they can't communicate anymore, you know. And this person that she was working with was at that point, so they couldn't really communicate it anymore. But it was clear that they were not comfortable, that they were not, that they were in some distress, you know. And she was at that stage. She was like, I don't know what to do for them. And then she remembered the Tonglen practice, and she just started breathing in their suffering, breathing out relief to them, over and over again. And she said within a few minutes, the person visibly, just relaxed. So this is a practice. Like, we don't have to be great practitioners. We don't have to be Buddhists. We don't have to be, somebody who's done a million years of retreat or whatever. Like, we can all do this practice. This by virtue of the fact that the mind itself is powerful. It's not magic. It's just the mind is powerful. It's also a really great practice to do when we're in a difficult relationship, right? And like, maybe, it's somebody that we used to love or we still love, but we're having a difficult period with them, or a family member or a work colleague, this kind of thing. Um, um, uh, if we can do Tonglen for that person, like a difficult person who's we're in a difficult relationship with, a lot of times we'll see that relationship really change, you know. And the idea behind that is not that we try to change the other person. Like normally that's our approach, right? We're having conflict with somebody and we want them to change, right? We're not happy with them for some reason. And that sets up this dynamic like whether we're right or wrong, there's a dynamic there when we're both holding up that space, right? Person is here, we're here, and we're holding up that position, right? When we do Tonglen for them, we're trying to see things from their point of view. We're approaching them with a heart of compassion rather than judgment. We're not saying that it doesn't involve necessarily saying they're right. Okay, we're just connecting with their pain, their own suffering, and approaching them, practicing having compassion for them. Okay, and when we do that, we move out of the way. Yeah, I think of it like judo. Somebody's coming at you, and you move out of the way, and that person's energy just keeps going, but it's not hitting you, right? So if we move out of the way, we can't maintain the dynamic anymore. It cannot continue in that way because we're not holding our space. Okay. So we move out of the way. We're approaching it differently. We're approaching it from the heart. We're approaching with a heart of compassion. We don't have to say anything to that person. We don't have to tell them we're doing this practice. We don't have to have a discussion, but they will notice over time that our position has changed. They will sense it, you know, in whatever way. And oftentimes, then they soften in return. And then we find that we can have a better relationship with that person. It's so powerful. It's really helpful. It's also like, I described the four types of individuals, right? Someone we love, someone who's neutral, someone we dislike or are having difficulty with, and ourselves. So that doing this practice for oneself is also so helpful, especially when we're having a really hard time. Maybe we're physically sick, or maybe our life is really difficult at the moment, or some combination thereof, or we're feeling really down on ourselves, or what have you. We can do Tonglen for ourselves. It's really healing. It's like rejuvenating. It can be really rejuvenating. This kind of practice is so helpful for people who are in like serving others in some way, like nurses, or if we're caring for someone who is ill or caring for children or whatever, and we feel really depleted, can really help to do this practice for ourselves. Okay? So, yeah. Okay, so today, out of those four categories, we're going to do this practice for someone who's neutral to us. Okay, so what does that mean? So, neutral is someone that we neither particularly like nor particularly dislike. We might like or dislike them a little bit, but we don't know them well enough to, feel strongly either way. But it should be someone that we know, like we could bring them to mind. Okay. So it can be like neighbor or your doctor or a distant relative or someone in that category. Okay. Now, why we do this practice? There are several reasons we do this practice. One is that, we're trying to generate compassion and bodhicitta for all beings without exception. Okay. Not just for those that we like or those that we love, but for all beings. And if we look at it, we can see that the vast majority of beings actually fit that category of strangers, right? Neutral. We're neither particularly like nor particularly dislike. They're just, and the problem is that we often see them as not human. We don't consciously, but it's kind of like they're just like Jimmy Rinpoche says, like they're just like ants, or cardboard cutouts. Like we don't really think of them as fully human beings. Okay. They're just other people in the road who are in our way, or other people in the store who got in line ahead of us, or, we're not even thinking about them. And that results or can result in sort of casually harming others because we don't notice them, because we're not thinking of them as a full being. Anybody who's worked in the service industry has a ton of experience like that, of people and we can see it, unfortunately, we can see it, online all the time, right? Where it's just people yelling at servers and retail workers and this, like, they're just not seeing them as human beings, right? So that's another reason why this practice is helpful. So the way that we do this, and I'll walk you through it, but like the main part that we do this is we're just connecting with that person, okay, and thinking of them as like a full human being, and then considering their sufferings, whatever they might be, and then doing this exchange like we did last week. Okay? Any questions before we dive in? No? Okay. So in this practice, if you want to close your eyes, go ahead and close your eyes. Otherwise, the posture is the same. Then begin by just settling in for a moment and then bringing awareness to the sensation of the breath, like what we just did. Now I'm going to ring the gong. Just listen to the sound as long as you can hear it and let your mind rest. So just let your mind settle. Now imagine in your heart center, so the middle of your chest, a bright white light like a shining star. And then consider that you're breathing in gray smoke, hot, dark, and heavy through all the pores of your body. All of that smoke dissolves into the white light in your heart center until there's not a single particle of smoke left. There's only light. Now imagine in front of you someone who fits that category of neutral. Right? So as I said, it can be neighbor, work colleague, doctor, checkout person at the store, whatever. You should recognize their face at least. So the first thing we want to do here is to bring to mind that this is a full human being. It's not a one-dimensional cardboard cutout thing. Right? So just like you, this person has a family, a history, likes and dislikes, dreams and disappointments. They're not just this one role, neighbor or mail carrier or checkout person or what have you. Just like you, they want to be happy. They want to avoid suffering. Just like you, they've made mistakes in their life. They've had success in their life. various relationships, dreams for the future. Just another sentient being. Then we bring to mind whatever ways this person may be suffering. So, because we don't know them, we probably don't know exactly what those are, but we can imagine maybe they're really sick, but don't look it. Sometimes people are really sick and look fine, or they have other physical difficulties. Maybe they're suffering emotionally or mentally from depression or anxiety or addiction. Maybe they are having trouble with their family or their work. Whatever it is, we don't actually need to know specifically. We just need to know that they're suffering because, unfortunately, as long as we're in samsara, cyclic existence, we are suffering. So we imagine that all their suffering, whatever it is, takes the form of gray smoke, hot, dark, and heavy. It leaves them and it comes to you. And you breathe that in through all the pores of your body. And all of that smoke dissolves into the white light in your heart center till there's not a single particle of smoke left. There's only light. And then you offer that person your own happiness, your own good fortune, whatever they may need to feel better, to be free of suffering, along with the wish that they attain full enlightenment in this very life. All of that takes the form of white light, cool, clean, clear, very bright. You breathe out this white light through all the pores of your body. And when the rays of light touch them, their suffering just completely disappears, just lifts off of them. And they feel so relieved and happy and peaceful. And you feel joyful for being able to do this for them. Now we do the same for all sentient beings. First imagining them all around us, in front, as many beings as we can conceive of, stretching all the way to the horizon. To the right, again, as many beings as we can imagine, all the way to the horizon. Behind, again, as many beings as we can conceive of, stretching all the way to the horizon. And to the left, same thing, all the way to the horizon. So now we're in the middle of a sea of sentient beings, and we'll notice that the vast majority of them fit this category of neutral. So we want to take them out of the category of neutral and put them in the category of loved ones, of cared for. And we just begin by doing the same thing, that they're all have full lives, their own likes and dislikes, dreams, disappointments, etc. Each one of them wants to be happy, wants to avoid suffering, yet each one of them is suffering nonetheless. And we generate compassion for their suffering. And then we consider that all their suffering, whatever it is, takes the form of gray smoke, hot, heavy, and dark. It leaves all of them and it comes to you with a great deal of courage and love and compassion. You breathe that in through all the pores of your body, and all of that smoke down to the very last particle dissolves into the white light in your heart center until there's not a single particle of smoke left. There's only light. Now you offer each one of these beings your own happiness, your own good fortune, anything at all that they may need, along with the wish that they attain full and complete enlightenment in this very life. And all of that takes the form of white light, cool, clear, very, very bright. And you breathe that out through all the pores of your body, every pore emanating a ray of light in every direction as far as the eye can see. And when these rays of light touch all of these beings, each individually, their suffering just lifts off of them and disappears like fog in the morning sun. And they feel so happy, so relieved, at ease, peaceful, and you feel joyful for being able to do this for them. Now you let go of the visualization altogether. Gently bring the mind, the awareness back to the sensation of the breath, allowing that sensation to keep the mind in the present moment, here and now. Can you pass these prayers around, please? So now we're going to do the closing prayers. If you're on YouTube, you'll find a link for them in the description below. We start with saying long life prayers for the Dalai Lama and our main teachers. Making the aspiration that they live long so they can continue to share their wisdom with us. And then these 4 prayers we do just in Tibetan. And on the other side, on the next page, we'll cover that when we get there. Okay. Kanri wawe kowe shinkan su pandande wa malu tuwene. Chinre siwan tenseng kyam suye. Shabega gaba tu tengu shi. Om swasti jigme kempe kalo yamparu. Kugab sechen su se pundawa. Nidrudun sanam ke nobucho. Sejega we shakinta su so. Om swasti silaikam sochin laptin june. Kunsin se yuju kamawa. Sangsum nadre gyapo tatene. Lavchen tende shetun taige sho. Lama kukam sampo sawade. Chuduku se wingwa sawade. Trine tashinge pa sawade. Lama dandre wa me pa chingi lo. So on the other side, we have say this first prayer once in English, once in Tibetan, the remaining 3 just in English, and then the 100-syllable mantra. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may defeat the enemy in wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of cyclic existence, may I free all beings. Sonandi tamche sepani tonene Dronam pamje shin kegana chi balon trupai sipe sole droa sho. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be. And where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. As long as space endures, as long as sentient beings remain, until then may it too remain and dispel the miseries of the world. Ever absorbed in the display of divine forms and primordial awareness, appearance, sound, and perception in the state of divinities, mantras, and dharmakaya, may I, inseparable from the practice of the profound and secret great yoga, attain within the essence of mind the state of one taste. Om Vajra Sattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajra Sattva Tenopa Tishtadrito Me Bhava Sutokayo Me Bhava Supokayo Me Bhava Anurato Me Bhava Sawasiri Me Prayatsa Sawakama Sutsa Me Chitam Shriyam Kuruhu Aha Ha Ha Ho Bhagavan Savatagata Vajramame Munsa Vajripama Samaya Sattva. All right, so thank you for coming this morning. Thank you, YouTubers, for coming. And we'll see you not next week, because next week is family meditation, I believe. I'll just double check that. Yes, next Saturday is family meditation. So if kids or children's meditation, you can come. You're more than welcome to come to that. And that's it. So we'll see you in a couple weeks. Okay, bye.
So, can I